Taifa, Intrigue and War in Medieval Spain. This is a card-driven game, which is maybe a war game. It definitely has a war theme. People will be attacking each other all the time. But it is also very simple, very linear, a little bit abstract, or maybe considerably abstract. So I don't know, I hesitate to call it a war game. In any case, it can be played by 2 players. It can be also played by more than 2 players. However, in that case, the players are still divided in 2 main factions, Christians versus Muslims. This is a card-driven game, and each player will draw from the deck of their own faction. As you can see, they're different. Now, each player will have a group of castles. Castles can be level 1 or level 2. Castles will go on the board in these boxes that you see here, and each group has a starting location as described in the rules. So you will start by placing a level 1 castle in your starting box, and then players will alternate during setup, adding more castles. Now, as you can see, the areas in which the castles can go are connected by these lines. These lines here represent sea connections, but they functionally are exactly as land connections. They're different just for, to look interesting that way. So players will alternate adding new castles up to the number indicated in the rules. That changes depending on the number of players. When you add a new castle, if possible, it should be adjacent to a castle that you already have. So, for example, I do this, and then I do this, and then this player does that. And when you place castles in this phase, they are always on level 1. This player places 1 there. Well done, because that's a good position, because it has a defense of 3. These numbers that you see there represent the defense level of the castles, and so on and so forth until each player has placed all of their allowed castles, and then all of the spaces that are still left empty after that are filled in with these white castles that simply represent a neutral faction. But again, you have up to 6 playing factions plus the neutral one. So that between the playing factions and the neutral one, I'm just gonna place a bunch, then the entire board will be full. Then players draw 8 cards each. This is only for the first turn, though. At least the first turn is the only one in which you're sure you're gonna draw 8, because after that there will be possible modifiers. Game effects will cause you to get a bonus, so you will draw extra cards, or a penalty, so you will go fewer cards. Here we also have a victory point track, pretty self-explanatory, where you record victory points. They can go negative, alas, but if you ever get to have 6 victory points, you immediately win the game, even if it is in the middle of a turn. If no one wins the game because of sudden victory, then you play for 4 full turns, and at the end of the 4th turn, the player with the highest total is the winner of the game. If there is a tie, then the player with the highest bonus. If still a tie, it is a tie. Now, you have, as we said, your hand of cards. Cards can be events, then you simply do what the text says. They're self-explanatory. They may be reactions. They can be played out of turn, and again, you do what the text says. They can be used to influence combat. And then we have troops that have a strength value, which is indicated on the card itself. So you have your hand of cards. And at the beginning, when it is your turn, you can do one of the following things. Actually, you have to do one of these. You can pass. So you start with the easy ones. You can simply discard a card and you place it face down in the discard pile. You really don't want it, don't know what to do with it. But you can play a card for its event, in which case you play the card or simply resolve the event. But the 2 main actions in the game are attack and incursion, and they work in similar ways. When you perform an incursion, you will discard a troop card of any kind, and then you will roll a die. If you roll a 4, 5, or 6, the opponent will lose a random card. So it's a simple way of damaging the opponent, damaging their hand of cards. But the most important type of combat is the main attack. Now, to declare an attack, you will simply indicate a castle of the opponent that you want to attack, which is adjacent to one of yours. You will put down as many troops from your hand as you want, but you put them there face down. You commit them to combat. Then the opponent, usually the defender, can play reaction cards. Other players can also support the defender. They don't want you to win against that battle, and so they can play reaction cards that can affect what happens then. After that is done, all cards are revealed, and here you have the number of dice that the attacker will roll. Suppose the attacker has committed 5 troops. This is the number of dice that the attacker will roll. The defender will roll a number of dice equal to the defense of the location in which they are. As you can see, they change. For example, plus the level of the castle. Here would be 3 dice. The attack against this castle, the defender would only roll 2 dice. Again, if you're not taking into account possible modifiers, the level may improve due to events. So, each player calculates how many dice they roll. The attacker rolls. Each 4, 5, or 6 is a hit. The defender rolls. Each 4, 5, or 6 is a hit. If the attacker has scored more hits than the defender, the attacker wins. Otherwise, same number or lower, the defender wins. Whoever wins the fight is gonna get 1 victory point and to increase by 1 position their status in on the bonus track. The loser will lose a victory point and 1 position on the bonus track. Also, if the attacker wins, the attacker gets to replace the castle of the defender with one of their own, and they replace it with a level 1 castle, even if, for example, the one that was destroyed was a level 2. This is pretty much the general idea, really. You use your cards to trigger events, to mount attacks, and you try to spread around as much as you can and to score a lot of points. And this is how you play Taifa. Taifa, I liked the idea when I read the rulebook. I thought it had a lot of potential. After playing the game, I think the game is okay. It's not a bad game, but I'm not terribly passionate about it. It is great to have a card-driven war game that does not require you to embrace, I won't say a cult, but a different lifestyle. When you play very complex card-driven games like For the People of Empire of the Sun, is almost like really you're entering a brotherhood or sisterhood or siblinghood of really motivated people. So having a game that is not just for the hardcore war gamers, but that has an idea that I play cards, I activate events, that is fun. However, I'm almost thinking like this is too much of a good thing if good thing is simply fine. It goes to the point that the game really feels abstract. It doesn't really feel like a war game anymore. You don't really see much of a theme shining through. It becomes this sort of like card-driven go with art, with the medieval art on the cards. And so there is that in a sense it becomes like an abstract game with a war themed and with the war idea that you're attacking all the time. And so it's almost like these two things don't necessarily go all that together. You almost have like Knizia hand management problem, but then you're attacking all the time. I guess that there are some abstract traditional games in which you're quote-unquote attacking all the time. I guess checkers is like that too. But the fact that that here you have those two things, I don't know that they go all that well together. Which is not a big deal. I would say that to me, the deal that prevents the game from being more than it is, and more than, I guess, more than it could be. No, something cannot be more than it could be. That's philosophically unacceptable. Something that I think holds the game back is the fact that gameplay is repetitive. The beautiful thing is simplicity, but there are games that have simple gameplay. They give you, 1-2 options per turn, well, 2-3 options per turn, and yet those somehow result in interesting gameplay. Here you have a limited range of options that results in limited repetitive gameplay. Yeah, you're just mounting battles and trying to win those battles. The luck factor doesn't bother me all that much because you roll dice a lot, and as you know, if you roll dice a lot, things are gonna even themselves out in the long run. The problem is that you're always just doing this, mounting attacks, roll the dice, I take a castle, then you take one from me, then I take one from you, etc, etc. This limitation, the repetitive element, is particularly evident when you play with 2 players. In fact, this is not a game that I particularly enjoy playing with 2 players, because it's really like I take a castle from you and you take a castle from me. After all, you took a castle from me because it was easy to take, because it was in a location that wasn't heavily defended, and now you took it from me. What am I gonna do? Go and attack one that is much harder? Well, I'm gonna attack that one because that, as we had just established, is easier to take. True, the idea is you encircle your weaker areas, so with areas that are harder to take, but then if they're hard to take for the opponent, they're hard to take for you, etc, etc. Yes, you can play around with the geography a little bit, but after all, there's just gonna be a lot of back and forth of fighting for the same castle, switching sides over and over again. Maybe that's historical, I don't know enough about the theme. I know that in terms of gameplay, it's not particularly captivating. With more players, now of course, things can be more interesting. First because then the net changes a little less drastic. With 2 players, I win, then I get a bonus and you get a penalty. It's always like mirror-like. With more players, well, now we're splitting the pain and the rewards because I get attacked 2 times by 2 different players. So now the system of relative changes on the bonus track and the victory point tracks is more interesting, and it also opens the possibility for diplomacy, negotiation, scheming, etc, etc, etc. And that makes the game a little more interesting. But again, it just at the end, the problem is that it feels a little bland. I admire that they tried to do a very playable, a casual card-driven war game. The result just is not very flavorful. It's not very very exciting, and that's pretty much the problem. There's an analogy that I use in several of my videos, which is a spent beer, a flat beer, the beer that you left out, you drink it the day after. It's still good, still better than water, but it's not bubbly and exciting as it could be. And so this is kind of like this. When I play it, it's not like, whoa, finally a game that has it's great fun in its own simplicity. It does feel like the diluted version of something which is more complex but also more engaging. And as such, it makes me miss, well, those are the games that I don't get to play all that often anyways, because they're too complex. So to me, it's not really an alternative, like when I want to play one of those games with simpler rules, because it is just... I can play it, yes, but it's not as all that rewarding. So Taifa, Intrigue War, Medieval Spain. It's a little abstract. It's easy to play. There's nothing really that is a deal breaker. It's just that gameplay is not all that exciting.